Like, comment, and subscribe.
Once upon a time, in a kingdom surrounded by forests and hills, a queen longed for a child. Every morning she gazed at the snowy landscape outside her window and whispered, "If only I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony." One winter day, as she sewed by the fire, she pricked her finger on a needle. The drops of blood fell on the snow, and the queen sighed. "How I wish for a child as pure as this snow, as red as my blood, and with hair as dark as ebony." Soon after, her wish came true, and she gave birth to a daughter she named Snow White. Her skin was flawless, her cheeks rosy, and her hair black as a raven's wing. Tragically, the queen passed away soon after, leaving the king to care for his young daughter. Heartbroken, the king eventually remarried. His new wife was extraordinarily beautiful, but cruel and vain. She possessed a magical mirror that spoke the truth. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" she would ask. The mirror always answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest." For years, this flattery fed her vanity and deepened her jealousy of anyone else's beauty. As Snow White grew, she became even more beautiful than her stepmother. Her skin was pale, her lips red as roses, and her hair black as ebony. She was gentle, kind, and cheerful, adored by all. But the queen's envy grew each day. She could not bear that Snow White might one day surpass her in beauty, and planned to get rid of her. One day, the queen summoned a huntsman, a skilled man of the forest. "Take Snow White into the woods," she commanded, "and do not return without her heart. Only then will you be rewarded." The huntsman, loyal but kind-hearted, was horrified. He loved Snow White and could not harm her. Still, fearing the queen's wrath, he agreed to go, hoping to find a way to save her. The next morning, Snow White followed the huntsman into the forest, unaware of the queen's plan. The forest was dense, with sunlight barely filtering through the tall trees. Birds sang from hidden branches, and animals darted through the bushes. Snow White laughed and skipped along, enchanted by the beauty of the forest, unaware of the danger. Finally, the huntsman stopped. "Snow White," he said, his voice trembling, "you must run far from here. Your life is in danger. Never return to the castle." Snow White, frightened but trusting, nodded. The huntsman handed her a small bundle of food and water. "Be brave," he said. "Trust the forest. You will survive." With one last glance, he disappeared, leaving Snow White alone. Snow White wandered cautiously, learning to navigate the forest. She followed streams for water, picked berries, and found hidden clearings to rest. Though fear threatened to overwhelm her, she grew more courageous with every step. She discovered the forest was alive and protective, offering shelter and guidance. By nightfall, Snow White had found refuge beneath a sturdy tree. She whispered a prayer to the stars, asking for guidance and safety. "I will survive," she promised herself, feeling determination bloom in her heart. The journey had just begun, and the forest held both dangers and wonders. Snow White knew that she must face these challenges with courage and kindness, for her destiny depended on it. Snow White wandered deeper into the forest, her heart heavy with fear. The trees grew taller, their branches forming a dense canopy that let in scattered sunlight. Birds sang in hidden branches, and streams trickled gently along the forest floor. Each cautious step was guided by instinct, and though the forest was vast and unfamiliar, Snow White felt it could also protect her. After hours of wandering, she discovered a small cottage hidden among the trees. Its roof was steep, and smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Tiny windows and weathered wooden walls made the home appear cozy and welcoming. Curious, Snow White approached and peered inside. She saw 7 little chairs and 7 small beds, neatly arranged. Her heart swelled with hope. She knocked, but there was no answer. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside. The cottage smelled of pine and fresh bread, sunlight streaming through the windows. Though empty, it felt safe. Snow White moved through the rooms, tidying, sweeping, and arranging the small beds. Her gentle presence seemed to bring warmth to the space. The owners of the cottage, 7 dwarfs, returned from a day of mining. They were surprised to find the house neat and welcoming. At first startled, they soon saw Snow White standing quietly. Her gentle smile and calm demeanor reassured them. She explained her story, how the evil queen had tried to kill her, and how the huntsman had spared her life. The dwarfs listened carefully, their concern evident. Moved by her tale, the dwarfs offered her shelter. "You may stay here as long as you need," said Doc kindly. Snow White accepted gratefully, relieved to find safety and kindness. Life in the cottage was simple but comforting. She helped with daily chores, cooked, cleaned, and tended to a small garden. The dwarves were hard-working and cheerful, and their laughter and stories filled the cottage with warmth. Each day, Snow White explored nearby paths, gathering berries and herbs, learning the forest's rhythms. Though aware that danger still lurked, she grew stronger, braver, and more resourceful. The forest, once a place of fear, had become a sanctuary. Snow White's heart filled with gratitude as she realized she had found friends who cared for her. Nights were quiet, but peaceful. Snow White lay in a small, cozy bed, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. She prayed for safety and hoped her courage and kindness would protect her. The forest and the dwarfs became her family, and her daily life was filled with purpose. Though far from the castle, she felt she had found a new home, a place where she could survive and thrive despite the shadow of the queen. Snow White's days passed with joy and care. She sang while cleaning, laughed with the dwarfs, and learned about the forest's secrets. Though her heart still longed for safety from the queen, she realized that she had discovered a life filled with friendship, hope, and love. The forest was her refuge, the dwarfs her family, and her courage would guide her through the challenges ahead. Back at the castle, the queen stood before her magic mirror, asking, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" As always, the mirror initially replied, "You are the fairest, my queen." But soon it added, hesitantly, "But Snow White, in the forest, has grown into the most beautiful of all." The queen's face darkened with rage. Her envy boiled over, and her lips twisted into a cruel smile. Snow White, alive and hidden, was now a threat to her vanity. "If she lives, I shall never be the fairest again," the queen whispered. From that moment, she began to hatch her first plan to rid herself of the young princess. Her thoughts were cold and calculating, every detail designed to be deadly, yet undetectable. The queen studied her magical mirror carefully. "Tell me where she hides," she demanded. The mirror responded with reluctance, describing the deep forest, the hidden paths, and the small cottage of the 7 dwarfs. The queen's eyes gleamed. She had finally discovered the location of Snow White's sanctuary. But the forest was dangerous, and the dwarfs protective. She would need cunning, not brute force, to achieve her goal. Disguising herself as an old peddler woman, the queen prepared a basket of beautiful goods, ribbons, combs, and shiny trinkets. She planned to use the girl's curiosity and innocence against her. No one can resist the charm of a beautiful gift, she murmured, tightening the scarf around her head to hide her face. She practiced a sweet, gentle voice, one that would sound harmless and friendly, so Snow White would not suspect the danger that lurked behind the disguise. Meanwhile, Snow White continued her peaceful life with the dwarfs. She sang cheerfully while cleaning, tidying the cottage, and preparing meals. The dwarves were at work in the mines, leaving Snow White free to tend to the home. Though she was happy, a part of her remained in it cautious. She knew the queen was powerful and jealous, and she often glanced toward the forest edge, aware that danger could approach at any time. One bright morning, as Snow White walked toward the clearing to gather berries, she heard a soft, gentle voice calling, "Hello, dear child. Would you like to see my beautiful wares?" Startled, she turned to see an old peddler woman standing nearby. Her face was wrinkled, and her eyes kind, and her basket was filled with ribbons, combs, and bright trinkets. Snow White hesitated, but felt the warmth in the woman's voice, and approached cautiously. The peddler displayed her goods with skill, holding up a shiny red ribbon. "Oh, such a lovely ribbon for such a beautiful girl," she said. Snow White admired the craftsmanship, unaware of the danger hidden behind the old woman's kind smile. The queen, in her disguise, whispered silently, "Just one small choice, and she will be mine." She offered the ribbon as a gift, claiming it would make Snow White even prettier. Curious and flattered, Snow White reached for the ribbon. As she did, the queen quickly and subtly attempted to fasten it around her neck. The ribbon tightened suddenly, and Snow White gasped. Realizing something was wrong, she struggled and tore the ribbon away. It fell to the ground, discarded. The old woman's face flickered with anger, but she quickly recovered her pleasant disguise. "Oh, what a clumsy ribbon! Perhaps another time," she said, forcing a smile. Snow White, sensing danger, stepped back. Her instincts warned her that the stranger was not what she seemed. Carefully, she picked up her basket and returned to the cottage, feeling a mix of fear and relief. That day, she realized that the forest, while beautiful, was also filled with unseen threats, and that the queen's envy would stop at nothing to destroy her. Back in the castle, the queen seethed with frustration. Her first plan had failed, but her resolve hardened. She was determined to try again, more cunningly and cleverly, for she would not rest until Snow White was gone. The seeds of danger had been planted, and Snow White's life would never be entirely safe as long as the queen's envy burned so fiercely. The queen sat in her dark chamber, fuming over her failure with the ribbon. "She survived," she muttered, glaring into the mirror. "That insolent girl! No trick, no disguise will escape my cunning. I will find another way, and this time it will succeed." Her hands trembled as she carefully crafted her second plan, one that relied on subtlety and deceit rather than force. The queen decided to disguise herself once again, this time as an old woman selling beautiful combs. She selected a comb from her collection and coated it with a deadly poison so subtle that even a single touch could render it fatal. The plan was simple. Snow White, curious and innocent, would admire the comb, use it in her hair, and the queen's malice would finally triumph. "It must be perfect," the queen whispered. "She must not suspect a thing until it is too late." Meanwhile, life in the forest continued as usual. Snow White rose with the sun, singing while she tidied the cottage. She cooked for the dwarfs, cleaned the rooms, and tended to the small garden. Though the forest was peaceful, she remained vigilant. The memory of the peddler woman and the near-deadly ribbon lingered in her mind. Snow White had learned that beauty and kindness could sometimes conceal danger, and she kept a careful watch at the forest's edge. One bright morning, while Snow White gathered water from a nearby stream, she noticed an old woman approaching, Her eyes twinkled kindly, and she carried a basket filled with brightly colored combs. "Good day, dear child," she called softly. "I have these beautiful combs for sale, only the finest for someone as lovely as you." Snow White, cautious but curious, observed the woman carefully. She remembered the ribbon incident, but felt a gentle warmth in the stranger's voice. The old woman knelt beside her and offered a comb, gilded and sparkling in the sunlight. "This comb is true, magical," she said. "It will make your hair shine brighter than the stars. You simply must try it." Snow White hesitated, sensing something faintly off, but her curiosity and admiration for the beautiful comb overpowered her caution. She accepted it, brushing her hair gently as the queen watched every movement, her disguise flawless and her malice barely contained. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Snow White admired her reflection in a stream, the sunlight making her dark hair gleam. But then, a sudden dizziness overcame her. She felt her arms grow weak and her vision blur. Realization struck too late. The comb was poisoned. Panic coursed through her as she stumbled to the ground, gasping for breath. The forest, once a sanctuary, suddenly felt threatening and alien. Snow White's small body collapsed among the moss and fallen leaves, her eyes closing in unconsciousness. When the dwarfs returned from the mines, they noticed the cottage was unusually quiet. They found Snow White lying on the floor, her comb beside her, and panic gripped their hearts. Doc knelt beside her, examining her carefully. "She's poisoned," he cried. "The queen has struck again." The dwarfs acted quickly, attempting to revive her, but the poison was powerful and unyielding. Snow White lay still, her breathing shallow, and the cottage fell silent, filled only with the muffled cries of the dwarfs. The queen, back at her castle, smiled wickedly when she learned of the comb's effect. "At last," she whispered, her voice cold and triumphant. "Soon there will be no one to rival my beauty." Yet even in her triumph, a shadow of unease touched her heart. Magic, once controlled, could have unpredictable consequences, and the queen knew she must ensure the girl's demise completely. Despite the danger, the forest's magic and Snow White's inner strength were not easily defeated. Though poisoned and seemingly lifeless, her gentle heart and courage began to fight the darkness silently. The dwarfs, devastated but determined, refused to leave her side. They guarded her with unwavering devotion, vowing to protect her from any future attacks. Even in the face of death, the bond between Snow White and her protectors remained unbroken, hinting that hope and love might yet triumph over the queen's cruelty. Snow White lay in the dwarf's cottage, poisoned and seemingly lifeless, her dark hair spread across the floor like a silken curtain. The dwarfs gathered around her, their faces pale with grief. Doc, the wisest among them, examined her carefully. "There is no pulse," he murmured, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The queen's malice has done its work." Grief and despair filled the cottage. The dwarfs had grown to love Snow White deeply, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. Despite their sorrow, the dwarfs refused to leave her side. They knew the queen's evil would not stop, and that they had to protect her, even in death. After much discussion, they decided to place her in a glass coffin so that they could always watch over her. With trembling hands, they carried Snow White to a small clearing in the forest, where sunlight could touch her pale face. Carefully, they laid her in the coffin, arranging her hands across her chest and smoothing her hair. The coffin, made entirely of crystal-clear glass, reflected the soft rays of the sun, making Snow White appear as if she were merely sleeping. The dwarfs built a simple shrine around the coffin, decorating it with flowers and small trinkets that Snow White had loved. Every day, they tended to the flowers, polished the glass, and sat by her side. Though she did not awaken, they whispered stories and sang songs to keep her memory alive. The forest seemed to share their sorrow. Birds remained silent, and even the wind seemed to carry a mournful tune through the trees. The news of Snow White's death eventually reached the queen. She stood before her mirror, expecting the usual praise. "Mirror, mirror on the wall," she asked, her voice dripping with triumph, "who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror's reply was as cruel as truth itself. "You, my queen, may be beautiful, but Snow White's beauty and kindness will live forever, even in the hearts of the dwarfs." The queen's face twisted in rage. Her plan had succeeded in killing Snow White physically, yet her spirit, her memory, and her goodness remained untouched. Back in the forest, the dwarf's sorrow did not diminish. Days turned into weeks, and the forest remained quiet and solemn. Each dwarf mourned in his own way. Grumpy, usually surly and unyielding, often wept silently, while Happy tried to lift everyone's spirits with jokes and songs, though his laughter felt hollow. Sleepy and Bashful tended the garden, planting fresh flowers around the glass coffin, while Sneezy and Dopey ensured that Snow White's resting place was immaculate. Doc spent hours by her side, studying herbs and potions, hoping against hope that some remedy might awaken her. Even in her deep sleep, Snow White's presence brought life to the forest. Animals approached the clearing without fear, as if recognizing the purity of her spirit. Birds perched near the coffin, singing soft, mournful songs, while deer grazed nearby, their eyes gentle and watchful. The dwarfs took comfort in these small signs, feeling that though Snow White was gone, her goodness continued to touch the world around her. As the weeks passed, a sense of timelessness settled over the forest. Travelers who wandered too close often spoke of a beautiful young woman lying in a glass coffin, untouched by decay, surrounded by flowers, and watched over by 7 devoted dwarfs. Legends grew about the princess, who was both lost and protected, and the story began to reach the ears of distant kingdoms. Some whispered of magic, others of divine intervention, but all agreed that Snow White's beauty and kindness were beyond mortal bounds. Despite the sorrow, the dwarfs never gave up hope. They knew, deep within their hearts, that Snow White's story was not over. Love, kindness, and courage had always defined her, and they believed that these virtues could triumph over even the most cunning evil. The forest remained her guardian, the dwarfs her devoted companions, and the glass coffin a symbol of hope, protection, and the unwavering bond between a pure heart and those who truly loved her. News of the beautiful young princess in the glass coffin spread across kingdoms, reaching the ears of a noble prince. Tales of her innocence, kindness, and unmatched beauty had captivated him even before he laid eyes upon her. Driven by curiosity and a sense of destiny, the prince set out to find Snow White, following the whispers of travelers and the stories carried by the wind. He rode through forests, valleys, and hills, guided not only by maps, but by an inexplicable pull in his heart that promised hope, love, and the end of sorrow. At last, the prince arrived at the forest clearing where Snow White lay, encased in the crystal-clear coffin. The dwarfs, though wary of strangers, recognized his genuine respect and noble demeanor. Doc stepped forward and explained her story: the wicked queen, her poisoned comb, and the devoted dwarf's protection of Snow White in her eternal sleep. The prince listened intently, his heart aching at the injustice yet swelling with admiration for the girl's resilience and the dwarf's loyalty. As he approached the coffin, the prince was struck by the sight of Snow White. Even in her deep sleep, she radiated a gentle glow, her delicate features untouched by time, framed by dark hair that shimmered in the sunlight. The flowers surrounding the glass reflected her purity and goodness. The prince felt a profound sense of awe and tenderness. He knelt beside the coffin, whispered words of admiration, and felt a connection to Snow White that transcended words. In that moment, he knew that fate had brought him here, and that the bond he felt was powerful enough to overcome any obstacle. The prince, determined to awaken her, bent closer. He had heard legends that true love's affection could break even the most potent magic. With great care, he pressed a gentle, heartfelt kiss upon Snow White's lips. The dwarfs held their breath, watching the moment with a mixture of hope and trepidation. For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest remained silent, as though holding its breath in anticipation. Then, ever so slowly, Snow White's eyelids fluttered, and color returned to her cheeks. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and her lips curved into a soft, awakening smile. Snow White's eyes opened, meeting the prince's gaze. Recognition, gratitude, and a hint of wonder filled her expression. Though she had been unaware of the passing time, she felt an immediate sense of safety and warmth from the prince's presence. The dwarfs wept tears of joy, their hearts lightened by the miracle unfolding before them. The prince extended his hand, helping her rise, and together they stepped out of the coffin. Sunlight bathed Snow White's face, revealing the brilliance of her beauty and the kindness that radiated from her very soul. The forest seemed to celebrate her awakening. Birds chirped melodiously, deer approached gently, and a soft breeze carried the scent of flowers to the clearing. The dwarfs rejoiced alongside the prince, their relief and happiness evident. Snow White embraced her rescuers, thanking them for their unwavering devotion and care. Though she had faced darkness, fear, and danger, her heart remained pure, her courage unbroken, and her kindness untainted. The prince, captivated by her grace and strength, spoke of hope and a future filled with light. "Snow White," he said gently, "your bravery and goodness have brought you through the darkness. You are a light to all who know you. I would be honored to stand by your side, protect you, and are a life of joy with you." Snow White, touched by his sincerity and guided by the instinctive bond they shared, nodded with trust and affection. Their connection, forged in courage and goodness, promised a future free from fear and full of hope. The dwarfs, witnessing the union of hearts and the triumph over the queen's evil, celebrated with joy. Snow White and the prince's story became a symbol of love, courage, and the triumph of goodness over malice. Together, they prepared to leave the forest, carrying with them the memory of loyalty, devotion, and the unwavering bond between Snow White and her protectors. The forest, once a place of refuge, now became a place of celebration, honoring the light that Snow White's pure heart had brought into the world. With Snow White awakened and safe, the prince and the dwarfs accompanied her back toward the kingdom. The journey through the forest was filled with hope and joy, a stark contrast to the fear and sorrow that had once shadowed her path. Birds sang cheerfully above, and sunlight filtered through the trees, guiding them forward. The dwarves, though reluctant to leave their beloved companion, knew her destiny was calling. Snow White had grown into a young woman of courage, kindness, and wisdom, ready to reclaim her place in the world. As they approached the castle gates, news of Snow White's survival had already spread. The townspeople gathered to catch a glimpse of the princess who had been thought lost forever. Their cheers echoed through the streets, filling the kingdom with excitement and relief. Children ran alongside the carriage, waving flowers, and elders whispered tales of Snow White's purity and bravery. Her gentle smile and radiant presence inspired everyone, reminding the kingdom of the goodness that still prevailed even in the darkest times. The queen, unaware of Snow White's survival, continued her daily consultations with the magic mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, "Who is the fairest of them all?" she demanded. The mirror's response, as always, was honest. "Queen, you are fair, but Snow White has returned, and her beauty and virtue surpass all." Rage consumed the queen. Her vanity, her envy, and her malice could not tolerate the triumph of the girl she had tried to destroy. Determined to act, she plotted one last attempt, seeking to seize power and destroy Snow White once and for all. But the prince and Snow White arrived before the queen could carry out her evil plan. The moment she saw Snow White, standing tall and alive, her heart sank. Her schemes had failed, and the consequences of her cruelty became painfully clear. Snow White, with her newfound courage and wisdom, faced the queen without fear. "Your envy and cruelty have caused much pain," she said calmly, her voice steady. "But goodness, love, and truth always endure." The court gathered, witnessing the confrontation. Snow White's calm and confident presence shone brightly, while the queen trembled with fury and fear. The magic mirror, unable to lie, confirmed the truth of Snow White's words. The king, realizing the depths of the queen's malice, acted swiftly to protect his daughter and the kingdom. The queen's reign of vanity and cruelty ended that day, her plots exposed, and she was banished from the kingdom forever. Justice had prevailed, and the people rejoiced. With peace restored, the prince and Snow White's bond deepened. Their love, born from respect, courage, and shared trials, grew stronger with each passing day. Snow White, grateful for the dwarfs' devotion and her forest refuge, invited them to remain close, honoring the loyalty and care that had preserved her life. Together, they celebrated the triumph of goodness, kindness, and love over malice, cruelty, and envy. The kingdom flourished under Snow White's presence. Her wisdom and compassion inspired reforms, acts of charity, and celebrations that brought the people together. Villagers, knights, and nobles alike admired her, not just for her beauty, but for her courage, humility, and kindness. The prince and Snow White ruled side by side, guided by justice, empathy, and the memory of the trials they had overcome. Their union symbolized hope and the enduring power of goodness in the world. As time passed, the story of Snow White became legend, told to children and travelers alike. The tale carried lessons of bravery, kindness, and the triumph of light over darkness. The dwarfs, once humble miners, were honored for their loyalty and devotion, their bond with Snow White immortalized in songs and stories. The forest remained a cherished memory, a place of refuge and courage, reminding all who heard the tale that even in the face of danger, goodness and love could prevail. Snow White and the prince lived happily, their kingdom filled with joy, laughter, and harmony. The shadows of envy and cruelty had been vanquished, and a new era of hope and prosperity began. And so, the story of Snow White, the princess who overcame malice with courage, kindness, and love, endured forever, inspiring hearts and reminding the world that goodness always triumphs in the end.